Let's consider all of the phases of the software development life cycle. We begin with the analysis phase, where the goals and requirements of the software system are carefully defined. Next comes design, where initial concepts are transformed into structured blueprints. This is followed by implementation or coding, where the actual software is built line by line. Once developed, the testing phase ensures the system functions correctly by identifying and fixing any errors. Finally, in the maintenance phase, the software is continuously updated and refined to keep it running efficiently over time. All of these are the phases of development. Now, we can see other models that describe the development of software, but this is the basic software life cycle, the classic life cycle for the development of software. And it means that you will do analysis, design, coding, testing is carried out, and maintenance is a key phase of looking after the software once it's been deployed and released. So these 5 phases here are fundamental to what's termed the classic software lifecycle. Let's consider the analysis phase of the software lifecycle. Analysis in the software lifecycle is the phase where user needs and system requirements are thoroughly examined and defined to guide the design and development of a solution, where the solution is the finished software system. Now, this phase is where the developers of the software will go and interview the customer, the person who wants the software developing. And another word for customer you will often hear when you look at analysis is the stakeholder. These are the people that come to a software house and say, can you develop a system to perform the following, please? And this is an intensive communication period where you will interview the stakeholder, the customer, and glean what it is they want the system to do. And it's fundamental to good software engineering practice. You don't go and start writing code because you think you know what the customer wants. You have to ask them what they want so you can work out the requirements for the system. It's called analysis. It's sometimes referred to as requirements gathering. My preference is to refer to it as requirements analysis. You're analyzing what the customer wants. And as I say, there's lots of conversations that take place between the software developers and the stakeholders. Following the analysis phase, we have the design phase of the software lifecycle. Design in the software lifecycle is the stage where the system's architecture, components, and interfaces are planned to meet the specified requirements. In practice, the analysis phase will have produced documentation, which will take many forms, and we'll look at that documentation later in this playlist. The documentation is then given to the designers. The designers will then make decisions about the overall structure of the system. For example, if the stakeholders, that is the customers, was a doctor's surgery and they wanted you to develop a software system to help run their surgery, the analysts would have asked lots of questions, and no doubt they would have come up with the need for something to control appointments. They would also require something that would digitize medical records, so medical records could be looked at on a computer screen. Now, what the designers would be doing is identifying the component parts of the system. In other words, the architecture of the system. Now, there's more to the design phase than just identifying the overall architecture. And various documentation is produced during the design phase, which again, I'll be looking at later in this playlist. But I think what you need to take from this is the analysts produce documentation, which is then given to the designers. They then will design, producing documentation that will then be given to the coders. And I think I would like to stress that the design stage is not where you write any code. What you do here, you look at the overall design and you produce artifacts, and these artifacts help the coders produce the programs that, when tested and integrated into one system, will produce what is required by the stakeholders. The output from the design stage would be artifacts, examples of which, if you were developing in the object-oriented paradigm, would be various UML diagrams, Unified Modeling Language diagrams, examples of which would be a class diagram. But there's much more to design than just producing class diagrams. But a class diagram is something that would typically be given to coders. And these class diagrams would guide the computer programmers, allowing them to code up a class in an object-oriented programming language, for example. Now, as I've said, there are many more artifacts that we could consider here, but I just want to give you a flavor of what goes on in the various phases of software development. The following phase is the implementation phase. Implementation, in other words, coding, in the software lifecycle is the phase where developers, computer programmers, translate design specifications into executable code, building the actual software system. In other words, the coders would take the information given to them by the designers, which in the object-oriented world would be various UML diagrams, and they would code them. The advantage of the design phase is to ensure that design artifacts are given to coders, so the coders produce programs that are actually needed. In other words, there is a systematic approach to the development of a software system. This means you don't just dive into coding. You have to ensure you've done the analysis and the design to ensure that what you're developing is what the customer actually wants. The next phase of the software lifecycle is testing. Testing in the software lifecycle is the phase where the system is evaluated through various methods to identify defects, verify functionality, and ensure it meets the specified requirements. Testing is essential. Before software goes live, it's checked for bugs, performance issues, and usability. No one likes a glitchy app. The next phase of the software lifecycle is the maintenance phase. Maintenance in the software lifecycle is the phase where the system is updated, enhanced, and corrected post-deployment. In other words, after you've released the software to the customer, to ensure continued performance, security, and relevance over time. We can see that the phases of the software lifecycle are as they appear on this slide. So, software development, in other words, software engineering, isn't just coding. It's problem solving, planning, and building with purpose to ensure that the finished product actually matches what the stakeholder asked for. And to achieve that aim, you have to treat all of these phases with due care and attention.